I told my son I was going to travel to my sister's house for a few days, but instead, I hid at my neighbor's place. That night, I watched him arrive with my daughter-in-law's entire family and a moving truck parked right in front of my driveway. I waited an hour, then I called the police, claiming that burglars had invaded my home. They will never forget what happened next. But to understand why I went to such lengths, I need to tell you how it all started. How a 1-year-old mother, who gave her entire life for her son, ended up spying from a neighbor's window while her own flesh and blood tried to steal the only thing she had left. It all began 3 months earlier, when David and Jessica moved into my house. At first, it seemed temporary, a helping hand. They were going through financial difficulties, or so they told me. And I, as always, opened my door without a second thought. I am his mother. It is my duty. I didn't give them the master bedroom on the second floor, but I made space in the closets. I reorganized my entire routine to accommodate them, and they arrived with their suitcases, their promises that it would only be for a couple of months, and that smile that I now know was completely fake. The first few weeks were tolerable. David worked, leaving early and coming back late. Jessica stayed at home, but we kept a polite distance. She in her room, I in mine. We would cross paths in the kitchen, exchange polite words about the weather or the food, and each would go on with her life. I thought it was normal, that they needed their space, that they were a young couple used to their independence. I never imagined that this silence was actually contained contempt. But things started to change when the 3rd month of having them under my roof rolled around. Jessica's gestures became colder. She stopped responding when I spoke to her. She would enter a room and leave the moment I walked in, as if my presence physically bothered her. David started avoiding my gaze. He no longer sat with me to drink coffee in the mornings as he used to. He no longer asked me how I had slept. I no longer existed for him, except when he needed something. A hot meal, clean laundry, silence for his work calls. And then the comments began small at first. Jessica looking around the living room and saying with a studied sigh, "This house is so big for just one person, don't you think, David?" He would nod without looking at me, or when they passed by the empty guest room. What a waste of space. So much could be done with this. I heard every word, every insinuation, and I felt something inside me begin to harden. One night, exactly 2 weeks ago, I heard voices in the kitchen. It was almost 11 p.m., and I had come down for a glass of water. I stopped in the hallway when I recognized Jessica's conspiratorial tone. She was on the phone. "Don't worry, Dad. It's almost all ready. We just need her to leave for a few days, and we can make the move." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. The move. What move? I stood there paralyzed in the darkness of the hallway, holding my breath so as not to make a sound. David already spoke to the locksmith. Jessica continued with a voice that tried to sound casual but oozed excitement. "He says he can change the deadbolts in less than an hour, and your lawyer already has the papers ready to prove that we've been living here as caretakers for a while. Squatters' rights or adverse possession, something like that. I don't understand the legal terms well, but Richard says it's solid." Richard, her father. So the whole family was involved in this. It wasn't just my son and my daughter-in-law. It was a family plan, a complete conspiracy to take my house from me. I went up the stairs in silence that night. Each step weighed on me as if I were carrying stones on my shoulders. I closed my bedroom door and sat on the bed, shaking not from fear, but from rage, from an indignation so deep it burned me from the inside out. I gave them everything, absolutely everything, my time, my space, my peace, my home, and they were planning to steal the only thing I had left. The house I bought with my late husband 40 years ago. The house where David grew up, where the memories of my entire life reside. And they wanted to snatch it from me as if I were an obstacle, as if I were trash to be thrown out when no longer useful. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark thinking, analyzing, planning. Because if I have learned anything in 71 years of life, it is that tears solve nothing. Self-pity is a luxury I cannot afford. And if my own son was willing to betray me in that way, then I could play too. But I would play better. I would play to win. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. I made breakfast. I smiled when David came down. I asked Jessica if she wanted more coffee. They looked at me, surprised by my sudden kindness, but accepted without asking questions. They ate in silence while I washed the dishes, and in my mind, I was already 3 steps ahead. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I just needed time and allies. That afternoon, when they went out, I crossed the street to Martha's house. She's my neighbor of a lifetime, the only person in this neighborhood who really knows me. I knocked on her door with my heart racing, and when she opened it with that warm smile she always has, I knew I had made the right decision. "Martha, I need your help," I told her bluntly, "and I need you to trust me because what I'm going to ask will sound completely crazy." Martha ushered me into her living room without asking questions. That is one of the things I value most about her. After 30 years of being neighbors, she knows my silence as well as my words. She knows when I need to vent and when I need action. And that day, my face made it clear that it was not the time for tea and light conversation. It was time for the truth, for rawness, for taking off the mask of the self-sacrificing mother I had worn for too long. I sat on her cream-colored sofa, and the words came out like a river dammed up for years. I told her everything. Jessica's passive-aggressive comments, David's indifference, the conversation I had overheard the night before, the plan to change the locks, the conspiracy with Richard and a lawyer, everything. Every detail I had been keeping inside because I was afraid to admit that my own son was capable of such a thing. Martha listened in silence, and when I finished, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't pity. It was fury. Fury on my behalf. "Those bastards," she said finally, with a voice so low I almost didn't hear her. "After everything you did for him, after raising him alone when your husband died, after paying for his college, after giving him everything." I nodded, feeling tears threaten to spill, but I held them back. It wasn't time to cry, it was time to act. "I need you to let me stay here for a few days," I told her directly. "I'm going to tell them I'm traveling to my sister's house, but actually, I'm going to be here watching. I need to see what they're going to do when they think I'm not around." Martha didn't hesitate for a second. "This is your house as much as the one across the street," she replied, taking my hand. "Stay as long as you need. And if you want, I can call my nephew. He's a police officer. He can guide us on what to do if things get ugly." I shook my head. "Not yet. First, I need proof. I need to see them with my own eyes trying to rob me, because a part of me, as stupid as it sounds, still has hope. Still wants to believe that maybe I misunderstood that conversation, that maybe David isn't capable of betraying me like that. How naive I was. The next day, I called Mr. Simmons, my lawyer, the same man who had handled my husband's will 20 years ago. A serious, meticulous man, the kind who doesn't speak just to hear his own voice. I explained the situation to him in clear, concise terms, without unnecessary drama. He listened, asked some specific questions about the title of the house and how long David and Jessica had been living with me. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Margaret," he said finally, with that deep voice that always conveyed security. "What they are planning to do is a crime. Trespassing, burglary, unlawful detainer. And if they have the audacity to change the locks while you are away, it is even worse." "What should I do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I had already been formulating it in my mind for days. Mr. Simmons took a deep breath. "You need evidence. If they are really going to do what you think, you need someone to witness it. Witnesses, or better yet, for the authorities to catch them in the act. That makes it indefensible." Exactly what I thought. "I have a plan," I told him, "but I need you to tell me if what I'm going to do is legal." And then I told him my idea. Every part, every detail. The fake departure, hiding at Martha's house, the wait, the call to the police. When I finished, Mr. Simmons remained silent for a moment that seemed eternal. Then I heard something that sounded almost like a stifled chuckle. "Margaret, in 40 years of practicing law, I have never heard anything like this. But technically, legally, you aren't doing anything wrong. It is your house. You have the right to report a break-in if they are indeed breaking in. And if it turns out your son is involved, well, the law makes no exceptions for family ties." Those words gave me the confirmation I needed. I wasn't being vengeful. I wasn't being cruel. I was being smart. I was protecting myself in the only way I could. That night, during dinner, I dropped the bomb with the greatest possible naturalness. The three of us were at the table eating in that uncomfortable silence that had become our normal, when I said, as casually as possible, "Tomorrow I'm traveling to my sister's house for a week, maybe a little longer. I haven't seen her in months." And she's insisting, David looked up from his plate so fast I thought he would hurt his neck. "Tomorrow?" he asked with a voice that tried to sound casual but oozed anxiety. "Yes, early tomorrow. I already bought the ticket. It leaves at 8 a.m. It was a lie. Of course. There was no ticket, there was no trip, there was only a plan. Jessica and David exchanged a look. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. It was the look of two conspirators who have just received the signal they were waiting for. The look of two people who know their moment has arrived. "That's great, Mom," David said finally, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It will be good for you to rest a bit, a change of scenery." Jessica nodded, bringing a fork to her mouth. "Yes, Margaret. Enjoy yourself with your sister. We'll take care of the house." "Oh, I'm sure you will. I'm sure you'll take care of it very well." That night I didn't sleep either. I lay in the dark listening to the sounds of my house, the familiar creaks of the wood, the hum of the refrigerator, David and Jessica's footsteps on the floor above. I thought about all the years I had spent within these walls. The Christmases, the birthdays, the nights when David was little and had nightmares, and I rocked him until he fell asleep. The Sundays cooking with my husband. The moments of happiness that now seemed to belong to another life, to another version of me that still believed in family loyalty, in gratitude, in unconditional love. But that woman died the night I heard my daughter-in-law planning to rob me. The woman who remained is someone different, someone harder, someone who learned that sometimes you have to protect yourself even from your own blood because blood guarantees nothing. It doesn't guarantee loyalty, it doesn't guarantee respect, and it definitely doesn't guarantee that people won't betray you when money is involved. This house is worth approximately $350,000. That's a good incentive for betrayal, I suppose. The next morning, I got up early. I dressed with care, choosing comfortable clothes as if I were really going to travel. I packed a small suitcase with some basic things: clothes, toiletries, a book. Everything had to look authentic. David and Jessica were still sleeping when I went down the stairs, dragging my suitcase with just enough noise for them to hear me. I wanted them to know I was leaving. I needed them to know. I left a note in the kitchen. "I left for your aunt's house. I'll be back in a week. There is food in the fridge. Take care of the house. Mom." Short, simple, without emotion. I took my keys, opened the front door, and went out into the street with my suitcase. The sun was just beginning to rise. The streets were empty. It was the perfect moment. I walked slowly toward the corner as if I were going to catch a cab or a bus. But instead, I went around the block and came back through the back alley straight to Martha's house. She was waiting for me with the door ajar. She ushered me in quickly, locked the door, and pulled the curtains of the window facing my house. "Are you sure about this?" she asked me one last time. I looked through the slit in the curtain toward my own house, toward the windows I knew by heart, toward the door through which I had entered and left thousands of times, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. "Completely sure," I replied. "Now, we just wait." The first 2 hours were the longest of my life. Martha made me coffee, but I could barely take a sip. I was sitting in her living room, hidden behind the curtain, with my eyes fixed on my house like a hawk watching its prey. Every minute felt like an hour. Every second amplified my doubts. What if I was wrong? What if they were really just talking about something else? What if I was a paranoid mother destroying her relationship with her son over a misunderstanding? But then I remembered Jessica's tone of voice, the coldness in David's eyes, and I knew I hadn't been wrong. At 9:30 a.m., I saw movement. My front door opened, and David came out. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, work clothes, not his usual office attire. He walked to his car, took out his phone, and started talking. From where I was, I couldn't hear him, but I could see his gestures. The way he nodded, the smile spreading across his face. He was coordinating something. Someone on the other end of that call was confirming something that made him happy. Very happy. My stomach twisted. Jessica appeared in the doorway minutes later. She was also wearing casual clothes. She approached David, said something to him, and they both went back inside the house. Martha sat beside me, also watching. "See anything?" she asked in a low voice, as if they could hear us from across the street. "Are they plotting something?" I answered without taking my eyes off them. "I know it. I feel it in my bones." She put her hand on mine. "Whatever happens today, Margaret, I'm here. You aren't alone." Her words gave me a warmth I hadn't felt in months, because being alone isn't about not having people around, it's about not having someone on your side. And I had been alone in my own house for a long time. Time kept dragging on. 10 a.m., 11 a.m., noon. Nothing. David and Jessica went in and out of the house, but nothing extraordinary. I started to wonder if maybe they would wait until later, or maybe until tomorrow. Maybe the plan was for another day, and I was here wasting my time, spying like a crazy woman. But Mr. Simmons had told me to trust my gut, and my gut told me that today was the day, that they wouldn't waste this opportunity, not when they thought I was miles away. Martha brought me a sandwich at 1 p.m., but I couldn't eat it. My stomach was knotted tight. Anxiety had taken away any trace of hunger. I could only take sips of water and keep my eyes on that house. On my house. The house my husband and I bought when David was 3 years old. The house where we celebrated his graduation. The house where I watched him become a man. And now, that same house was the stage for his betrayal. The irony was so bitter it hurt. At 3:30 p.m., everything changed. I heard the sound before I saw it, a heavy engine, different from the cars that normally pass through our quiet street. I leaned closer to the window, and then I saw it. A moving truck. Large, white, with the logo of a transport company on the side. It stopped right in front of my driveway. My heart started beating so hard I thought Martha could hear it. "Oh my God," I whispered. It started. 2 men got out of the truck movers, clearly oblivious to what was really happening. David came out of the house immediately and started talking to them, pointing to the door, gesturing. Jessica appeared behind him with a huge smile. And then I saw something that made my blood boil. Behind them, getting out of a car that had just parked, came Richard, Jessica's father. A burly man in his 60s with that attitude of someone used to getting what he wants, and he didn't come alone. 5 people got out of that car. Richard, his wife, 2 more people I assumed were Jessica's relatives, and a man in a suit who clearly wasn't there to carry boxes. That had to be the lawyer, the one who supposedly had the papers ready to justify this invasion. I saw them all congregating in front of my gate as if it were a family reunion, as if they were arriving at their new home. At my home. "Martha," I said with a trembling but firm voice, "call Mr. Simmons. Tell him exactly what we thought is happening, and tell him to wait for my call." Martha took her phone immediately and stepped away to make the call. I couldn't move my eyes from the scene unfolding in front of me. David had opened the driveway gate completely. The movers began to open the back of the truck, and then they started unloading things. Boxes, furniture, a dining table, chairs, a sofa. They weren't my things. They were new things, or their things. They were bringing their belongings into my house. Not only were they keeping my property, but they were filling it with their stuff. They were erasing me, replacing me. I saw Jessica directing the workers, telling them where to put each thing. Richard and the alleged lawyer were next to David, talking in a serious tone. Every now and then, David nodded like a student receiving instructions from his teacher. My son. The boy I raised, to be honest, hardworking, decent. He was there nodding while his father-in-law explained how to steal from his own mother. The woman who gave him life, who sacrificed everything for him, who worked double shifts after his father died so he could go to a good university. And this is how he repaid me. "Mr. Simmons says to make the call when you're ready," Martha said, returning to my side. "He says you have every legal right to report a burglary. Do not hesitate. The law is on your side." I nodded, but I said nothing. I was still processing what I was seeing. The workers had already moved several pieces of furniture into the house. I saw them disappear through the front door, my door carrying a huge beige sofa. A sofa I had never seen, a sofa that was now going to be in my living room, occupying the space where the sofa my husband and I chose together so many years ago used to be. They had also thrown that out. My things had already begun to disappear. Jessica entered the house behind the workers. I saw her through the living room window directing where to place the sofa. Richard followed her, observing everything with that expression of satisfaction. His daughter had gotten a house, a good house in a good neighborhood, without paying a single dollar for it. She just needed to get the troublesome old woman out of the way. And David, my own son, was the instrument to achieve it. Maybe he thought he would inherit the house anyway. Maybe he convinced himself that he was only accelerating the inevitable. Or maybe he simply didn't care. Maybe his love for Jessica was stronger than any loyalty toward me. Or maybe there never was any loyalty worth anything. I looked at the clock. It was 4:10 p.m. They had been moving things into my house for over half an hour, carrying, organizing, taking ownership. Martha looked at me expectantly. "Not yet?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "Not yet. I need it to be indisputable. I need them to have done so much that they can't deny it." She nodded, understanding my logic perfectly, because if I called too soon, they could say they were just storing things temporarily, that they were going to reorganize, that they had permission. But if I waited long enough, if I let them fully settle in, there would be no possible excuse. I watched as the man in the suit took some papers out of his briefcase. He showed them to David, who reviewed them quickly and nodded. Then he passed them to Richard. The three men were there next to the moving truck, reviewing documents as if they were businessmen closing a legitimate deal, as if they weren't in the middle of a crime, because that is what it was. A crime. Breaking and entering, trespassing, breach of trust, and probably a dozen other things Mr. Simmons could list better than I could. The workers came out to get more stuff. This time, they took down boxes. Many boxes, all labeled with black marker: kitchen, clothes, books, bathroom. They were moving in completely. It wasn't just staying in my house as they had been doing, it was taking total possession. It was turning it into their house and erasing any trace that I ever lived there. I wondered what they had done with my things. Did they store them in the basement? Did they throw them out? Did they burn them? Each thought was more painful than the last. At 4:30 p.m., I saw something that shattered the last piece of doubt remaining in me. David entered the house and came out carrying a box. It wasn't one of the new boxes they had just brought. It was one of my boxes. I recognized the worn cardboard, the moisture stains in one corner. He carried it to the edge of the curb and left it there next to three other boxes that were already piled up. Trash. My things turned into trash they were going to throw away. I leaned closer to the window, squinting to see if I could distinguish what was inside. And then I saw it. Peeking out from the top of one of the boxes, I recognized the silver frame of a photograph. It was my wedding photo. The photo where my husband and I were smiling, young, in love, with no idea that 30 years later I would be here spying while our son threw our memories into the garbage. Something broke inside me in that moment. It wasn't my heart, because that had already broken days ago. It was something deeper. It was the last emotional connection I had with the idea of family, with the illusion that blood means loyalty, with the hope that there was still something to save in my relationship with David. That died right there, watching my memories treated like waste, watching 40 years of my life reduced to boxes on the curb waiting for the garbage truck. "That's enough," I said quietly, but with a firmness that surprised even Martha. She looked at me and nodded. She knew exactly what it meant. It was time. I took out my cell phone with hands that no longer trembled. Rage had burned away any trace of nervousness. I dialed the emergency number, 911. 3 digits that were going to change everything. The phone rang once, twice. Then a professional and neutral voice answered, 911. "What is your emergency?" I took a deep breath and let my voice sound exactly as it should sound. Scared, trembling. The voice of an old woman who has just discovered something horrible. "I need help, please. I think there are burglars in my house. I just got back from a trip, and there's a moving truck in front of my house, and people I don't know moving things inside. Please send someone quickly. I'm afraid." Every word was calculated, every inflection planned. Because technically, I wasn't lying. There were people putting things into my house without my permission. The fact that one of them was my son was irrelevant to the law. The operator asked me several questions. The address, my name, if I was in a safe place, how many people I saw, if they were armed. I answered every question with the perfect tone of controlled fear. I gave her my address, 847 Magnolia Drive. I told her I was hidden at a neighbor's house, that I didn't know if the intruders were armed, that I had counted at least 7 or 8 people. The operator assured me that units were on the way and asked me to stay on the line. I told her yes, that I wouldn't move, that please, they should hurry. I hung up the call and looked at Martha. Her eyes were wide open. "Did you do it?" she whispered. "Did you really do it?" I nodded. Yes. And now comes the hardest part, waiting. I turned my attention back to the window. David, Jessica, Richard, and their entire entourage were still completely oblivious to what I had just unleashed. The workers continued unloading boxes. The lawyer kept reviewing papers. Everything seemed to be going according to their plan. They thought they had won. That in a few more hours, the house would be completely occupied by them, the locks changed, and me outside unable to do anything. What a surprise awaited them. I didn't have to wait long. 7 minutes later, I heard the sirens. First distant, then closer and closer. I saw David lift his head, frowning. Jessica stopped directing the workers and looked toward the street with a confused expression. Richard took a step forward, scanning the horizon. And then 2 police cruisers appeared with lights flashing, sirens wailing, stopping right in front of my house, right in front of the moving truck, right in the middle of their little criminal operation. 4 officers got out of the vehicles. 2 men, 2 women, all with that alert posture of someone who doesn't know exactly what situation they are going to find. One of them, a tall man in his 40s, approached David immediately. I could see his lips moving, but not hear the words from where I was. David raised his hands in a defensive gesture, clearly trying to explain something. His face had gone from confusion to panic in a matter of seconds. Jessica ran toward him, speaking quickly, pointing at the house. Richard joined the conversation, his body language aggressive, authoritative, as if he could intimidate the police the same way he probably intimidated others in his life. One of the officers approached the movers, who had stopped working immediately and were now standing next to the truck with expressions of worry. The officer spoke to them briefly. The workers responded, probably explaining that they were just doing their job, that they had been hired for a move, that they didn't know anything about anything, innocent pawns in my son's dirty game. The female officer began to walk toward the house, inspecting. David tried to follow her, but the tall officer stopped him with a firm gesture. He was asking him questions. I could see how David gestured, how he tried to explain, how his panic was increasing with every second. Jessica had her phone in her hand, probably trying to call someone. Who? The lawyer who was right there. Some other accomplice who could help them get out of this? There was no one who could help them. Not when the police were already there. Not when the crime was unfolding right in front of their eyes. Richard was talking to the lawyer, both with expressions growing graver by the minute. The lawyer took out his papers, tried to show them to one of the officers. The officer took them, reviewed them briefly, and then shook his head. He said something that made the lawyer step back. Whatever he had prepared, those papers were useless when the police find someone in the middle of an active home invasion. There is no document that justifies moving your things into another person's house without their explicit consent. Martha grabbed my arm. How do you feel? She asked with genuine concern. I paused to think about the question. How did I feel? Triumphant, disgusted, sad, furious, vindicated, broken, all at the same time. I feel like someone who is doing what she has to do, I answered finally. And it was the truth. I didn't feel good, but I felt correct. I felt just. I felt like someone who finally stopped being a victim and took control of her own life. The female officer came out of the house with a notebook in her hand. She said something to the tall officer, who nodded gravely. Then the officer turned to David and said something that he clearly didn't like. I saw my son shake his head violently, saw him gesturing with his hands, saw his face turn red. He was yelling. I could see it, even though I couldn't hear it. He was losing control. The perfect plan was falling apart, and he was entering panic mode. Jessica joined the shouting. She pointed at the house, pointed at me well, pointed at the empty space where I should be. She was probably saying that she lived there, that they had the right, that I had given them permission. Lies upon lies. But the truth was simple. The property titles were in my name, only in my name, and I wasn't there, and I hadn't signed any permission slip. And the house was being invaded by a group of people who, in the eyes of the law at that precise moment, were intruders. The tall officer took out his radio and spoke for a few seconds. Then he put the radio away and made a gesture to David. It was a gesture I would recognize anywhere. The request for identification. David took out his wallet, extracted his license, and handed it to the officer with trembling hands. The officer reviewed it, took notes, then asked for the same from Jessica, Richard, and the lawyer. They were logging everyone, taking names, creating an official record of who was involved in this invasion. Each name would remain in a police report. Each person would be marked as part of this. The movers were clearly uncomfortable. One of them tried to get into the truck, probably to leave, but the female officer stopped him. She explained something. The worker nodded, resigned. They had to stay until the situation was resolved, until it was clear what was actually happening. Poor people, they just wanted to do their job and earn their money. Now they were trapped in the middle of a family drama that would probably give them material to tell stories for years. "When are you going to appear?" Martha asked, still holding my arm. I looked at the clock. 4:52 p.m. The police had been there almost 15 minutes. Enough time for them to record everything, for them to see the furniture inside the house, the boxes, the undeniable evidence of what was happening. But it wasn't my moment yet. I still needed the tension to increase a little more, for David and Jessica to dig their grave a little deeper with every word they said, with every lie they tried to construct. I watched as the situation continued to unfold like a macabre play where I was the only spectator with the full script. David gestured more and more desperately, trying to explain something to the officer who clearly wasn't believing him. Jessica had started to cry. Fake tears, I'm sure. The same type of tears she had used with me for months to get what she wanted. But the officers weren't like me. They didn't have years of emotional manipulation clouding their judgment. For them, this was simple. A house. People moving furniture in without the owner present. Case closed. Richard tried to maintain composure, but I could see cracks in his facade of a powerful man. He kept talking to the lawyer in a low tone. Urgent. The lawyer shook his head negatively, his hands moving in gestures that clearly said, "There is nothing we can do now." All their carefully elaborated plans were crumbling because they had committed a fundamental error. They underestimated the old woman. They thought I was weak, naive, easy to manipulate. They never considered that I could be sharper than them. The female officer came out of the house again, this time accompanied by the second male officer. They were carrying boxes in their hands. My boxes. The ones David had put on the curb as trash. They were documenting them. Taking photos. Creating evidence that they weren't just invading the house, but also disposing of the legitimate owner's belongings. Each photo was another nail in their coffin. Each piece of evidence made it more impossible for them to escape the consequences. One of the neighbors had come out of his house. Mr. Albert, an older man who lived 3 houses down, stood in his yard watching the spectacle with barely disguised curiosity. Then another neighbor appeared. I think her name is Teresa, with her dog. She stopped to pretend the dog needed to sniff something right in front of my house, when in reality she was as interested in the drama as anyone. The entire neighborhood was going to find out about this. By tomorrow, everyone would know that David and Jessica had tried to steal my house. Public shame would be almost as devastating as the legal consequences. I saw the exact moment David realized the gravity of the situation. It was when the tall officer showed him something in his notebook and said something that made my son go completely pale. He swayed slightly, as if he had been hit. Jessica grabbed his arm, her face also twisted in shock. Whatever the officer had told them, it was serious enough to finally penetrate their bubble of arrogance. Maybe he told them they were being formally accused of burglary. Maybe he mentioned jail. Maybe he explained exactly how many legal problems they faced. Whatever it was, the effect was instantaneous and satisfying. "It's almost time," I murmured, more to myself than to Martha. She nodded, understanding. I stood up, smoothed my clothes, made sure my hair was in order. I needed to look exactly like what I am supposed to be. An older, respectable lady who has just returned from visiting her sister and finds this horrible surprise. A victim, a betrayed mother. I couldn't seem too composed. That would arouse suspicion. But I couldn't seem too dramatic either. The perfect balance between shock and wounded dignity. Martha walked me to her door. Before opening it, she took both my hands. "You are the bravest woman I know, Margaret Henderson," she said with shining eyes. "And whatever happens out there, remember that you did the right thing. You protected yourself, and there is nothing wrong with that." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat that wasn't acting. Despite all my planning, despite all my determination, a part of me still couldn't believe I was really about to do this, that I was about to confront my son publicly, that I was about to definitely destroy our relationship. But there was no turning back, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to turn back. I left Martha's house and started walking toward the street slowly, like a woman of my age would after a trip, with my suitcase rolling behind me. The sound of the little wheels on the pavement was the only thing I could hear besides my own heart beating like a war drum. I crossed the street diagonally, directly toward the group of people congregating in front of my house. One of the officers saw me first, straightened up, alerted his partner. All eyes turned toward me. And then I saw David's face. I will never forget that expression. It was like seeing a ghost. His eyes opened so wide I thought they were going to pop out of their sockets. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face went from white to red to white again in a matter of seconds. And in his eyes, I saw something that gave me a dark, deep satisfaction. I saw fear, pure and absolute fear. Because in that moment, he realized he had been deceived. That his mother, the silly old woman he thought he could manipulate, had outsmarted him. That all this had been a trap, and that he had fallen directly into it. "Mrs. Henderson?" asked the tall officer, approaching me with a professional expression, but with a glint of something in his eyes that looked like understanding. I nodded, letting my face show exactly the right amount of confusion and worry. "Yes, that's me. What is happening here? Why are the police at my house?" My voice came out perfect, trembling, but controlled, the voice of someone who genuinely doesn't understand the situation. Although, of course, I understood every detail better than anyone. The officer looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Ma'am, we received a report of a possible break-in at this address. Are you the owner of this home?" I nodded again, more emphatically. "Yes, this is my house. I've lived here for 40 years. But I don't understand." "Break-in?" "I just went to visit my sister for a few days. I took my phone out of my pocket, showing it as evidence of my innocence. I even have the messages with her if you need to see them." The officer shook his head. "That won't be necessary for now, ma'am. But I need you to confirm something. Did you give permission to anyone to move furniture into your house during your absence?" I pretended to think for a moment, furrowing my brow as if I were really considering the question. Then I shook my head slowly. "No, of course not. Why would I do something like that? I was only going to be away for a few days." Then, as if I were just noticing them, I turned my gaze toward David and Jessica. I let my expression pass from confusion to recognition to shock. "David? Jessica? What are you doing here? What is all this?" My voice broke on the last question. I didn't have to fake that part. Despite everything, despite knowing exactly what they had tried to do, seeing them there, trapped in their lie, still hurt me. David tried to approach me, but the officer stopped him with a firm hand gesture. "Mrs. Henderson, these people claim they live in this house and that they had your permission to conduct a move. Is this correct?" I let my confusion appear genuine. "Live here? Yes, David is my son. He and his wife were staying with me temporarily because they had financial problems. But that is very different from living here permanently. And I definitely never gave them permission to bring a moving truck. Whose furniture is all that?" "Mom." David's voice came out hoarse, desperate. "Mom, can we explain? There's a misunderstanding." I looked him directly in the eyes. And in that moment, I let the mask drop for a second. Just a second. Enough for him to see in my eyes that I knew everything, that I knew exactly what he had tried to do, that there was no misunderstanding, that this was justice. I saw his face change when he understood. I saw the moment he realized his mother had beaten him at his own game, and I saw something else in his eyes, something that broke me a little more. I saw that not even in this moment, not even caught in his crime, did he show genuine remorse. He only showed rage at having been discovered. Jessica started speaking quickly, her words tripping over each other. "Margaret, this isn't what it looks like. We just wanted to give you a surprise. We were going to redecorate the house for you, so when you came back, you'd find everything nice and new." I looked at her with a mixture of amazement and contempt. Even now, even with the police present, she was still trying to manipulate me. She still believed she could get away with a poorly constructed lie and a fake smile. What an insult to my intelligence. What disdain for my ability to reason. "A surprise," I repeated slowly, letting skepticism color every syllable. "That's why there's a moving truck? That's why my things are in boxes on the curb?" I pointed to the boxes the officers had photographed. "That's why you are throwing my wedding photos in the trash?" I saw Jessica turn pale. She had no answer for that. There was no way to spin that truth into something positive. Richard tried to intervene, his voice grave and authoritative. "Officer, clearly there is a family confusion here. If you give us a moment to speak in private with the lady, I am sure we can resolve this without involving the authorities." The tall officer looked at him with an expression that could freeze hell over. "Sir, with all due respect, we have already involved the authorities. We are the authorities, and based on what we have seen and what the homeowner is telling us, there is sufficient cause to believe a crime was being committed." Richard opened his mouth to protest, but the officer raised a hand, silencing him with a gesture that admitted no argument. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you a few more questions. Can you confirm that you are the sole legal owner of this home?" I nodded firmly. "Yes, officer. The house is completely in my name. My husband passed away 20 years ago, and I inherited everything. I have never added anyone else to the title." The officer took notes meticulously. "And how long have these people been living with you?" I did the math mentally, though I already knew the exact answer. 3 months. They moved in back in October because they said they needed temporary financial help. The female officer approached and addressed me with a softer voice, almost maternal. "Ma'am, I understand this must be very difficult for you, but I need you to be completely honest with me. At any point, did you agree with your son that he could take the house? Any verbal promise? Any future transfer agreement?" I looked her straight in the eyes, letting her see the absolute truth in my gaze. "Never, officer. There was never any conversation about transferring the property. David is my only son, and naturally, he will inherit when I die. But that does not give him the right to take my house while I am still alive and perfectly capable of taking care of myself." David took a step forward, his voice rising in volume. "Mom, you can't do this. I'm your son, your only family." I looked at him, and in that moment, I let out all the coldness I had been holding back. "Precisely because of that, it hurts so much, David. Because you are my son, because I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. Trying to rob me, throwing my memories in the trash as if they were worth nothing, as if I were worth nothing." My voice broke on the last sentence, and this time, it wasn't acting. Despite all my control, despite all my planning, the pain was real. Devastatingly real. Jessica tried to approach too, but the female officer blocked her. "Ma'am, please keep your distance." Jessica ignored the warning and tried to go around the officer, her voice rising to a hysterical shriek. "You planned it all! You set a trap for us. You're a manipulative old woman." Those words fell into the silence like stones in a pond. Everyone stood still. The tall officer turned to Jessica with a stony expression. "Can you repeat that, ma'am?" Jessica realized too late what she had said. Her face turned red and then white. She had confessed. She had just admitted in front of the police that they knew I wasn't really traveling, that they realized it was a trap, which meant they knew they were doing something illegal. The officer looked at his partner, who nodded with an expression that said, "Clearly, I heard it too." Then he turned to me. "Mrs. Henderson, do you want to press formal charges against these people?" The moment froze. This was the definitive question. The one that would change everything, irreversibly. A part of me, a small and stupid part that still clung to the idea of family, wanted to say no, wanted to believe there was still some way to fix this. But then I looked at David. I looked at my son, and I didn't see regret. I didn't see remorse. I only saw rage because his plan had failed. I only saw resentment because I had outsmarted him. And in that moment, I knew there was nothing to save. "Yes," I said with a clear and firm voice. "I want to press charges against everyone involved in this." David let out a cry that sounded almost animal. "You can't do this to me! I'm your son!" I looked at him with a calm that surprised even myself. "And I was your mother. But you decided that meant nothing when you planned to rob me. Now you have to live with the consequences of your decisions." The tall officer took a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "David Henderson, you are under arrest for burglary, trespassing, and attempted unlawful detainer." What followed was chaotic. David tried to resist, struggling with the officer. Jessica began to scream, her hysteria escalating to levels that made some neighbors come out of their houses to see what was happening. Richard tried to intervene physically and had to be restrained by the female officer. The lawyer, in a flash of self-preservation, had backed away to his car, clearly wanting to distance himself from the disaster as quickly as possible. The movers were up against their truck with eyes wide open, probably praying they wouldn't be dragged into this. The second male officer spoke into his radio, asking for backup. Minutes later, Another patrol car arrived. More officers, more handcuffs. Jessica was arrested too, screaming obscenities the entire time. Richard tried to use his influence, mentioning names of important people he supposedly knew, but the officers didn't flinch. The laws make no exceptions for social connections, especially when the crime is so evident. They handcuffed him too, although with more care due to his age. His wife began to cry, begging them not to take him, that he had heart problems. The officers called an ambulance as a precaution, but they didn't release him. I stood there, holding my suitcase, watching as my son was put into the back of a police cruiser. Our gazes met for a moment through the car window, and in his eyes, I no longer saw rage. I saw something worse. I saw hate. Pure hate directed toward me, toward the woman who gave him life, who raised him, who sacrificed everything for him. Now he hated me. And strangely, that hate freed me. Because it meant I didn't have to feel guilty. I didn't have to wonder if I had done the right thing. His hate was the proof that there never was any real love there, only convenience, only self-interest. The patrol cars left, taking David, Jessica, and Richard. The lawyer had already disappeared, probably to legally distance himself from the whole affair before he got dragged down. The movers were talking to one of the officers who stayed behind to take their statements, explaining that they were innocent, that they were just doing a job. The officer assured them they weren't in trouble, but that their testimony would be needed for the case. They nodded, relieved, and began reloading the furniture into the truck to take it back to wherever it came from. The female officer approached me with a notebook. "Mrs. Henderson, we need you to come to the station tomorrow to complete your formal statement. Do you have a place to stay tonight? Technically, your house is now a crime scene, and we need to document everything before you can go back inside." I nodded, suddenly tired. The adrenaline rush was beginning to fade, leaving me empty. "Can I stay with my neighbor?" The officer nodded sympathetically. "Good. And ma'am, for what it's worth, you did the right thing. What they tried to do to you was a serious crime. You had every right to defend yourself." I spent that night at Martha's house, lying in her guest room, staring at the ceiling in the dark. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face when they put him in the patrol car, that hate in his gaze, that absolute rage. I wondered exactly when I had lost my son. Was it when he met Jessica? Was it gradual, over years of resentments that I never noticed? Or had he always been this way? And had I simply refused to see it, blinded by maternal love that made me idealize someone who was never who I believed him to be? Martha knocked on the door around 3 a.m. She came in with 2 cups of chamomile tea. "I saw the light on. I figured you weren't sleeping." She sat on the edge of the bed and handed me a cup. The hot liquid comforted my hands, but it couldn't touch the cold I felt inside. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. I thought about the question honestly. Did I regret it? No, I answered finally. It hurts me. It tears me apart. But I don't regret it. Because if I hadn't done what I did, right now I would be on the street without a home, without anything, and they would be inside, sleeping in my bed, probably celebrating their victory. "I know," Martha said, squeezing my hand. "I just wanted to make sure you know it too, because the next few days are going to be hard, Margaret. People are going to talk. Some are going to say you went too far, that he's your son, that you should have found another way." I drank my tea slowly, letting her words settle. Let them talk. They weren't there these last few months. They didn't hear the comments. They didn't see how they treated me like a nuisance in my own home. They didn't hear Jessica planning to rob me. Let them judge from the outside all they want. I know my truth. And I knew it with a certainty that went beyond any doubt. The next morning, I went to the police station as instructed. The detective assigned to my case was a man in his 50s named Detective Martinez, with tired eyes that had seen too much of humanity's worst side. He sat me down in an interrogation room and started asking me questions. Every detail, every date, every conversation I remembered. I told him everything with methodical precision. The call I overheard between Jessica and her father, the comments about the house being too big, the 3 months of subtle mistreatment, my plan to expose them. Everything. When I finished, the detective leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't completely decipher. "Mrs. Henderson, I have to tell you that in my 25 years doing this, I have never seen someone handle a situation like this with such calculated coldness. Most people in your position would have panicked or confronted them directly. You set a perfect trap. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a criticism. I did what I had to do to protect what is mine, I replied simply. He nodded. And you are within your rights. I just wanted you to know that your son and daughter-in-law are alleging that you manipulated them, that this was an elaborate revenge for some prior family conflict. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Of course they are, because accepting that they tried to steal from an old woman would be admitting that they are exactly what they appear to be: thieves, people without scruples. It's easier to paint me as the villain. The detective took out a folder and opened it in front of me. We have solid evidence, ma'am. Photos of the furniture being unloaded, testimonies from the movers, your belongings in boxes on the curb, the recorded conversation of the 911 call. And we have your daughter-in-law's involuntary confession, admitting they knew it was a trap, which implies knowledge of guilt. The case is strong. What will happen now? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The detective closed the folder. They will be processed for burglary, attempted unlawful detainer, and possibly conspiracy to commit fraud. And we can prove the lawyer was involved in creating false documentation. Depending on the criminal records we are reviewing, they could face between 2 and 5 years in prison, although realistically, they will probably negotiate a plea deal for probation if they plead guilty. 5 years. My son could go to prison for 5 years. Because of me. No, I corrected myself mentally. Because of him. Because of his decisions. Because of his greed. I left the police station feeling older than ever. The weight of 71 years had never been so palpable. Martha was waiting for me in the parking lot, faithful as always. She drove me back to the neighborhood but not to her house. The police had finished processing my home, and they had given me permission to re-enter. I stood in front of my door with the keys in my hand, feeling a strange resistance to entering. This house, which had been my refuge for 40 years, now felt contaminated, stained by betrayal, by hate, by pain. But it was my house, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me, not David, not anyone else. I opened the door and walked in. The interior was in chaos. The new furniture they had managed to move in was exactly where the workers had left it when the police arrived. Open boxes with David and Jessica's things scattered everywhere. My own objects moved from their places. Photos knocked over. The sofa my husband and I bought so many years ago was shoved into a corner, replaced by that horrible beige sofa I never asked for. The living room looked like a battlefield, and in a way, it was. I started cleaning methodically. I took out every object that didn't belong to me, every box of their clothes, every piece of new furniture. I piled everything in the garage. The police had told me that technically those things still belonged to them and they would have to come collect them eventually, but that I had the right to remove them from my living space. I worked for hours, sweating, getting tired, but without stopping. Every object I removed was an act of recovery, of claiming my space, of erasing their presence from my life. When I got to his room, I stopped in the doorway. This had been David's room as a child. He had slept here for 18 years. Here he had dreamed his childhood dreams. Here I used to sit on the edge of his bed and read him stories before sleep, and now it was full of his and Jessica's things. His clothes in the closet, his personal items in the drawers. Evidence of a life they had been living while planning to steal mine. I started packing everything into boxes. Clothes, books, electronics, everything. I did it without emotion, as if I were cleaning out strangers' room. I found something that made me stop. It was an old photo hidden at the bottom of the nightstand drawer. A photo of David and me when he was maybe 7 years old. We were at the park, both smiling at the camera. I was holding him, even though he was getting too big for that, and he was hugging my neck with that absolute trust children have, knowing they are safe. I looked at that photo for a long time. That boy in the image loved me. I was sure of that. What happened to that love? When had it transformed into indifference and then into betrayal? Had it been my fault somehow? Did I spoil him? Did I give him too much or too little? I put the photo in my pocket. I didn't know why. Maybe as a reminder that once, a long time ago, things were different. Or maybe as a reminder of why it hurt so much. Because I wasn't just losing my present son, I was also losing the boy he was, all the versions of him that I had once loved. I finished packing everything into boxes and sealed them with tape. I wrote on each one with black marker, "Property of David and Jessica." I left them stacked in the garage along with the furniture they had tried to bring in. Let them come pick them up whenever they wanted. Or let them never come. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted their physical presence gone from my space. Every object I removed made me breathe a little easier, as if I were freeing myself from a weight I had been carrying without realizing it. The following week was a whirlwind of legal paperwork. Mr. Simmons guided me through every step. We filed documents. I signed affidavits. We reviewed the evidence again and again. David, Jessica, and Richard had hired their own lawyers, who were trying to build a defense based on the claim that a verbal agreement existed, that I had promised them the house, that they had been taking care of me and deserved compensation. Elaborate lies that didn't withstand basic scrutiny. There was no document, no independent witness, no proof that I had ever agreed to give them my house. The district attorney assigned to the case called me on a Tuesday afternoon. She was a young woman, maybe 35, with a firm and professional voice. "Mrs. Henderson, the defendant's lawyers have proposed a plea deal. They will plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for probation and community service, with no prison time. They want to know if you would be willing to accept." I remained silent for a moment, processing. Part of me wanted to reject it. I wanted them to face the full consequences, to spend time behind bars thinking about what they had tried to do. But another part of me, the more tired part, just wanted it to end. Wanted them out of my life once and for all. "What do you recommend?" I asked finally. The DA sighed. "Honestly, ma'am, family cases are complicated. If we go to trial, there is a possibility that a jury might feel sympathy for them precisely because he is your son. They might see you as too harsh. The deal guarantees a conviction on their criminal record. It guarantees they will have a permanent criminal history, and you can request a restraining order so they cannot approach your property. It's a win, even if it isn't as dramatic as we might like." She was right, and I was too tired to fight. "I accept the deal," I said. "But I want the restraining order. I don't want to see them near my house ever again." The deal was finalized 2 weeks later. David, Jessica, and Richard pleaded guilty to misdemeanor trespassing and attempted fraud. They received 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service each, and were left with permanent criminal records. The restraining order was approved. None of them could come within 500 feet of my house for the next 5 years. If they did, they would go straight to jail. It was enough. It had to be enough. I didn't go to the final hearing. I didn't want to see their faces again. Mr. Simmons represented me and called me when it was all over. "It's done, Margaret," he said with a tired but satisfied voice. "You can get on with your life now." But could I really? How do you move on when your only family betrayed you in the vilest way possible? How do you rebuild a life when the foundation of your existence, maternal love, turned out to be one-sided? I didn't have answers. I only had days ahead of me and the determination to fill them somehow. The neighbors started treating me differently, some with pity, which I hated, others with admiration, which made me uncomfortable. Mr. Albert from 3 houses down stopped me one morning when I was picking up the newspaper. "You did the right thing," he told me simply. "I know it doesn't feel like it." "But you did." I nodded, unable to form words. Teresa, the one with the dog, stopped greeting me altogether. Clearly she thought I had been too cruel, that a mother should never do what I did, and maybe she was right. Maybe I had crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. But they crossed a line first. I only defended myself. 2 months passed. The house slowly began to feel mine again. I redecorated David's room, transforming it into something completely new, a study, a space for me. I painted the walls a soft color that brought me peace. I bought new furniture that had no associated memories. Each change was a step forward. Each modification was an act of recovery. But the nights were still difficult. In the dark, alone in my bed, doubts visited me. Did I exaggerate? Was there a better way? Did I lose my son because I was too proud to forgive? One afternoon, 3 months after the incident, I received a letter. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from David. My hand trembled as I opened the envelope. Part of me expected an apology, words of regret, acknowledgement of what they had done wrong. But what I found was very different. The letter was short, written with hurried and angry handwriting. "I hope you're happy," it said. "You destroyed my life. Jessica and I lost our jobs because of the criminal records. We can't rent a decent apartment, all because of your selfishness. Because you didn't want to share a house that was going to be mine someday anyway. You are a terrible mother. You always were. Dad would be ashamed of you." The last words were the ones that hurt the most. Invoking my dead husband, the man I loved for 25 years, to attack me, it was a low blow designed to destroy me. And it almost worked. It almost broke me. But then I remembered something. I remembered the night my husband was in the hospital, days before he died, when he took my hand and said, "Margaret, promise me you will never let anyone walk all over you. Not even David. Be strong. Be the incredible woman you have always been." Those were practically his last coherent words. And now, years later, I finally understood what he had meant. It wasn't about being cruel. It was about being strong. It was about not allowing love to become a weakness that others could exploit. I tore the letter into small pieces and threw it in the trash. I wasn't going to respond. I wasn't going to give him the power to hurt me more than he already had. David had made his choice. I had made mine. And now both of us had to live with the consequences. Some would say I won. I have my house, my peace, my freedom. But it doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like a loss. The loss of an illusion. The loss of a family that maybe never really existed the way I thought. But it is a loss I can live with because the alternative was losing myself, and that was never an option. Martha continues to be my rock. She comes to drink coffee with me every morning. She accompanies me to medical appointments. She invites me to dinner on Sundays. She reminds me that I am not alone, even though my biological family abandoned me. Because family, I learned, isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the neighbor who opens her house to you when you have nowhere to go. It's the lawyer who fights for you without judging you. It's the detective who sees your truth when others only see conflict. It's the people who choose to be by your side, even when things get tough. I have started volunteering at a senior center. I help other people my age who are going through similar situations. Financial abuse by relatives is more common than people think, and many don't have the courage or the resources to defend themselves as I did. I share my story with them. Not with pride, but with honesty. I tell them it hurts, that it is one of the hardest things I have ever done, but I also tell them it is worth it, that their dignity is worth it, that their peace is worth it. It has been 6 months since that night I hid in Martha's house and watched my son try to steal everything from me. 6 months in which I have learned to live with the weight of my decisions. Some people ask me if I have ever considered forgiving David, if I have ever thought about picking up the phone and calling him, and the honest answer is no. Not because I am cruel, not because I enjoy pain, but because forgiveness requires repentance from the other side, and David never repented. Not even after being arrested. Not even after losing his job and his reputation. He still believes I am the villain of this story, that he was the victim. And I cannot forgive someone who doesn't even recognize what they did wrong. The house feels different now, quieter, more mine. I have made small but significant changes. I planted new flowers in the garden, bright colors that make me smile every morning when I see them. I changed the living room curtains for lighter ones that let in more light. I rearranged the furniture so the spaces flow better. Each change is a declaration. This is my house, my refuge, my space, and no one is going to take it from me ever again. Not with manipulation, not with betrayal, not with any elaborate plan, because now I know what I am capable of when cornered. And that certainty gives me a strength I never knew I had. Mr. Simmons came to visit me last week. We drank coffee in my living room, the same living room where David and Jessica once planned their robbery. "How are you really, Margaret?" he asked, with that direct manner that characterizes good lawyers. I thought about the question honestly before answering. "I'm sad," I admitted, "but I'm also at peace. And I think peace is more important than happiness when you're 71 years old." He nodded, understanding what I didn't say, that I had chosen my dignity over the illusion of family, that I had chosen to protect myself over maintaining a toxic relationship, and that choice, although painful, was the right one. One afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. For a second, I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. It was Jessica. Her voice sounded different, softer, more broken. "Margaret," she began, and I noticed she no longer called me by my name with that contemptuous tone she used to use. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I know it's late. I know the damage is done. But I needed you to hear it." I remained silent, processing. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately. But another part, a part that was perhaps too soft, wanted to listen. "Why now?" I asked finally. "Why after 6 months?" I heard her trembling breath on the other end of the line. "Because David and I split up. Because I lost everything. My job, my family, my reputation. And at some point, sitting alone in an apartment I can barely afford, I realized that it was all my fault. That if I hadn't been so ambitious, so greedy, none of this would have happened." Her words sounded genuine. Or maybe it was just another manipulation. I couldn't distinguish anymore. I didn't want to distinguish anymore. "Jessica," I said with a calm voice, "I appreciate your call, but an apology doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't give me back the months of peace I lost. It doesn't erase the fact that you planned to steal my house. Your consequences are the result of your actions, not mine." There was a long silence. Then I heard something that sounded like a held-back sob. "I know. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that you are right about everything." She hung up before I could respond. I stood holding the phone, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. I didn't feel satisfaction at her regret. I didn't feel vindication. I only felt tiredness. Tiredness of all the pain, of all the drama, of all the energy wasted on people who weren't worth it. I blocked her number after that call. Not because I was cruel, but because I needed to close that chapter completely. I needed to move forward without constantly looking back. Last month, I celebrated my 72nd birthday. Martha organized a small gathering at her house. Some neighbors came, people from the volunteer center, Mr. Simmons and his wife. It was intimate, warm, full of genuine laughter. No one mentioned David. No one asked about my family. Because the people there were my family. The family I chose. The family that chose me. When I blew out the candles on my cake, I didn't make a wish related to David. I didn't ask for reconciliation or forgiveness, nor anything to do with the past. I asked for peace. More days like this. More moments of simple joy. More reasons to smile. And I felt that maybe, just maybe, that wish was slowly coming true. Some nights I still dream of David. But not the adult David who betrayed me. I dream of the boy he was. With his laughter, with his hugs, with those moments when the world was simple and love was unconditional. I wake up from those dreams with tears on my cheeks, but they don't break me like before, because I have learned something fundamental in these months. You can love someone and still protect yourself from them. You can keep the good memories without allowing them to justify bad behavior. You can mourn what you lost without regretting having saved yourself. All that can coexist. And that coexistence is what allows me to keep going. This morning I was in my garden watering my new flowers. When Mr. Albert walked by, he stopped and looked at me for a long moment. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Margaret?" he asked. I shook my head, curious. "That you are still here. Many people in your situation would have given up. They would have let themselves be carried away by guilt or pain. But you keep going. You keep tending your garden. You keep smiling. You keep living." His words touched me deeper than he probably imagined, because he was right. I was still here. I was still standing. I was still fighting for my peace every day, and that in itself was a victory. I have started writing my memoirs. Not to publish them, not for the world to know my story, but for myself. To process everything that happened, to understand how I got here, to leave a record that I existed, that I fought, that I survived. I write them by hand in an old notebook, late at night, when the house is quiet. Each word is a release, each page is a catharsis, and slowly, line by line, I am reconstructing my narrative. Not as a victim, not as a villain, but as a woman who made difficult decisions and is learning to live with them. If I could go back, would I do it differently? People ask me that constantly, and the answer is complicated. Of course I wish David had never tried to rob me. I wish our relationship were different. I wish I had a real, loving, functional family. But I cannot change who David is. I cannot change his decisions. I can only control mine. And given the circumstances, given the information I had, yes, I would do it again. Because the alternative was losing everything. And at least this way I saved what was truly mine. My house, my dignity, my peace. There are good days and bad days. Days when I feel strong and days when I can barely get out of bed. Days when I am proud of what I did and days when guilt eats at me. But all those days are mine, lived on my terms. In my house, surrounded by people who genuinely appreciate me, and that has to be enough, because it is all I have. And honestly, it is more than many people have. I have my integrity, I have my home, I have my autonomy, and at 72 years old, I have learned that those things are priceless. They are worth fighting for. They are worth sacrificing for. Even when the sacrifice is your own family. The sun is setting now as I write these last lines. The golden light enters through my window, illuminating the walls I love so much. I hear the birds singing outside. I smell the coffee Martha just made at her house and will probably bring over any moment. And for the first time in a long time, I feel complete. Not happy in the traditional sense, but complete, whole, myself. And maybe that is all anyone can ask of life, to be true to oneself, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts.